Welcome to Cosmic Comics, Games and Collectibles, your zen of geekism. We carry comics old and new, magazines, toys, games like Pokemon, Magic, D&D. Want Godzilla, Ultraman, Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, Funko Pops? You'll find it all here. Shop our Cosmic Sound Room and pick up a record or two. Enjoy our Comic Coffee Lounge with a cup of Sasquatch coffee or a delicious menu item while geeking out over a super cool movie on our big screen. Come by and say hello to Maui. Cosmic Comic, Games and Collectibles. Superman loves us, and so will you.
And it is 7 o'clock, at least where I am, which is Central Time in the U.S. here, Northwest Arkansas. I am R.J. Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at CriticalBlast.com, and it's time once again for the LCS Guys, where we sit down and talk with a couple of our local comic shop owners, whoever decides to join the panel tonight. We might have some late arrivals. I'm kind of hoping we do, and it happens sometimes. For those of you who are new to the program, this started during the pandemic when we wanted to reach out to local comic shop owners around the country and find out how they were dealing with things. And, they were all in different situations. And as things opened back up, we just decided we were having so much fun doing this and talking about the comic book industry from the retailer perspective that we just wanted to keep doing it. So with that in mind, we have our first LCS guy with us tonight, Mr. Michael Tierney. Michael, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great. How y'all doing there?
If I were doing any better, they'd send me out for drug tests, I think.
So,
yeah,
don't want that.
We don't want to get too happy, I suppose. But you're doing great this week. You got that Robert E. Howard art chronology that's in the works.
Yeah.
Have you passed that $60,000 mark yet?
Not yet, but it's been a fantastic launch so far. We're so far ahead where the Egg Rice Bros art chronology was at this time. So I mean, it's been an incredible support and doing great sales. I mean, I'm just thrilled with it. It's doing great.
It's been going gangbusters. And
yes, it
speaking of gangbusters, we have our special guest with us tonight. And that's why everybody's tuning in to watch. They don't care about us anymore. We have Mr. Howard Victor Chaykin with us tonight. Mr. Chaykin, how are you, sir?
I am the usual combination of contentment and blind rage, which is always a sustaining thing for me. It's kept me young and green for years. Hey, before I forget, Michael, do me a favor. Get my email from RJ, and please email me the dope and data about that Robert E. Howard thing, because I'd love to help you out with that.
Oh, great. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. I think you'll like it. It's something.
I bought the Burroughs book. It was a fabulous thing. I ended up giving as a gift to someone who was teaching a young kid. And I wouldn't give the Robert E. Howard stuff away because it ain't for kids. But I certainly would love to have a look at that. So keep me posted, please.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thanks for your interest.
Sure.
Very cool. Glad to know you're a fan, sir.
Well, I mean, to a great extent, people tend to think that I'm a pulp guy because I've done all this crime stuff, but I never read the crime pulps. I mean, I was, for me, among the transformational experiences of my life, I mean, like the Saul on the Road to Damascus moments, was the day before my bar mitzvah. I was October the 25th, 1963. I had some dough in my pocket, and I went to the newsstand to see if there were any comics, and there weren't. But I bought a copy of A Fighting Man of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it changed my life. And then 3 years later, of course, the Howard stuff started appearing from Lancer. So I was a complete Sword and Planet, Sword and Sorcery guy in toto. That stuff just ate me. I read all the Burroughs imitators, all the Howard imitators. I read everything. And then by the time I became a working professional was what I wanted to draw. And that's what I did. So I can't read this stuff anymore because it just reflects an aspect of my character that I don't care about anymore. But I still have I hold the work in a fond place in my heart. I truly do.
It's funny how we can run into that one thing at one point in our life, and turns out that that's what we become doing later on. I was doing book reviews for another website, and a guy asked me, he said, "Hey, are you going to review the new Destroyer book when it comes out?" I'm like, I don't even know what the Destroyer is. So he got me hooked onto the Remo Williams series,
Right.
and now I've been the author of the last 3 of the novels in the series there. So
Wow.
I've been very blessed.
No kidding.
To do that.
Hey, I was going to show you something I think Howard would get a kick out of, dealing in art and, different
He's talking about
interpretations
me.
of artists. There was an image, a pulp that was a lost pulp that people did not accept that it was a pulp by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I mean, I had to fight. So in my chronology, I just actually showed you, they actually recreated the same scene on the inside of the pulp. Now, can you believe that this
Let me give you full
is the
screen here,
same
Michael.
scene as that? So that does not look like John Carter of Mars, does it?
Is that what they were selling it as?
Yeah, that's sort of Mars.
Wow.
So recreating the exact same.
Well,
same scene.
isn't
That's
Swords
what's
of Mars? Swords of Mars is the John Coleman Burroughs story that isn't that the latest one, last one?
Yeah, it's not the last one, but it's one of the later ones. It's right after Fighting Man of Mars, and
That's right. It's number 8.
And it opens with Burroughs running into John Carter with a flashlight. Well, this guy right here, he illustrated it. What you can kind of recognize in the book. He's naked.
Who did the cover? Who did that blue book cover?
I can't think of his name. I know it because I've got the chronology, but nobody wanted to believe that was actually the same scene as this. And but here's all things. I had to spend so much time.
Well, I mean, if you look at the costume to a great extent, I mean, when I was a kid, after I read the Burroughs stuff, I found the Jesse Marsh adaptations for Dell, which costume very similar to what that cover looks like.
Yeah. Well, here's another interesting thing too: is that I was so busy defending that this is really a lost Burroughs cover that and making the case for it. I didn't have time to mention that right here where I'm pointing at. That's Edgar Rice Burroughs appearing on the cover.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that's him in the story. I just didn't have room to talk about because I had to make the case that this is a cover. And then there was another cover in that series that everybody said was a Burroughs because it has 2 guys fighting. Well, it's got to be Burroughs. And it was for another story by another guy. So I had to.
Well, for me, while I was reading all the Burroughs stuff, I read all the Otis Adelbert Klein stuff, and then ultimately Lee Brackett, all that stuff. I mean, all the Sword and Planet stuff was a big part of my boyhood. And one of the things that's a great truth of my contemporaries, we all came together in the late 60s, early 70s to do comics in that first wave. And all of us were steeped in that same material. We were all John Carter and Carson and Venus fans. And we knew the material backwards and forwards. We really did.
Oh, that was a great time.
I went to work in Cocaine when I was 18. And he was the one who, by that time he stopped reading the material, but he was deeply steeped in the pulps. He came out of that world. I mean, the Burroughs stuff, the Howard stuff. Because he stopped reading it later on, he never read the Fritz Leiber material, which is a huge impact on me as a writer. And when I was 24 or so, I made friends with Michael Moorcock, who took me to a symposium at which Isaac Asimov, Philip Jose Farmer, and Fritz Leiber were there. And I met these 3 giants when I was this punk kid. And, Leiber's work has been a huge influence on me, both as an artist and as a writer. And, he is as much of an influence on me as, say, Frank Lesser, the guy who wrote Guys and Dolls and How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. I steal from everywhere and everything.
Well, yeah, that's what did Bill Gates used to say. Well, he probably stole this from somebody else. Says, good artists create, great artists steal.
Didn't start with Gates.
I didn't think
way before Bill.
Well, we've had a few things happen in comics this week, and I've got a little thing I'll add on here. Michael, I don't know if you get the previews magazine, but apparently April O'Neil is changing her name because this is the IDW cover for something called Arpel O'Neil, and I was like, I'm thinking that's not just a typo because you don't get a font and type out the cover to the book. Those are drawn and designed and laid out with, it's not a font. So Fortunately, I think IDW's got a fix to this, because the very next day I saw this pop up on Twitter. They're hiring for a junior editor. I think they had an opening come up. I'm not sure what happened.
What happened there?
Now, was this sabotage or stupidity? That's my question.
I think it was just laziness.
Yeah, well,
But I don't know why you're hiring a junior editor, because I'm sure this went past a senior editor at some point.
That must have been on the cover they sent them, because the catalog, is preview, so that would have been somebody at Diamond messing up. But that's probably the image they sent, so they probably really didn't get the image right. That's just crazy.
I will not judge out loud, but I will certainly judge privately.
Yes. Well, we judge a lot on the stream here.
I would certainly hope so.
The other thing that happened was quite a bit bigger, and we have a story about this, an opinion piece about this on criticalblast.com, and that is the Thought Bubble convention, where it's the safety thought bubble, I guess, where we had a small press could not attend a show because they felt threatened by the presence of Frank Miller, because of a book he did 10 years ago, and basically, said, I can't go if he's there. So the convention said, okay, we'll disinvite him. And then the lady said, well, I'm still not going, because now you've done it publicly and everybody hates me. For my part, if I'm going to go to a con and sit at a table and I find that somebody's not going to be there, or somebody's going to be there that I don't like, I first thought, it's on me to just not go if I feel that strongly about it. But then I realized, no, I go anyway because I'm a freaking adult, and I just attend and I, do my business. Has that ever happened to you, sir? That you?
Funny you mentioned this about.
Who's tried to cancel you?
Well, about 3 hours ago, I published a Substack essay about this very issue, and I'll let that speak for me.
I will go check that out.
Check it out. It's called Tiny Bubbles and Barrage Balloons.
Oh, nice. Can you drop a link to that if it's available in the private chat?
You have my email address. Email me and I'll reply to it with a link.
I will do that.
You might want to. I won't say should. You might want to just generally subscribe to my Substack page.
I will do that.
There's comedy classics and extraordinary hostility. I had not heard this person had opted not to show up because she was embarrassed at her request being made public.
Yeah, it's
that's. I wish I'd known that before I published, because that would have been an even more comic lanyard.
Well, the funny thing is that she's the one who first made it public. So people are angry now at Thought Bubble for forcing her to have to make it public, and it's.
My feeling is that if you feel in this sense, if this person felt she had the right to make such a statement, then that statement does not deserve privacy.
I completely agree.
I mean, well, read the Substack piece and you'll see exactly where I'm coming from. I talk in that piece about two events. One, where I was invited to a show when I looked at the list of other guests, decided that I did not want to be in the same room with those people for 2 days, and I opted out of the show, and I offered instead to do a signing for the guy's store. In another case, someone who despises me on an extraordinary level made the decision to show up at a show, but spent the entire week doing everything possible to avoid sitting at a dinner table with me and a bunch of other guests. And it became almost comic. But read the piece.
I'll do that.
And my feelings about this really boil down to the fact that if someone who's as hotshot a deal as that can get uninvited, someone like me who lacks that commercial footprint but has a certain patina attached to him by a bunch of shitheads who have no idea what they're talking about for a belief system which I do not have, I'm in danger of being canceled myself. Under the circumstances right now, as things are evolving and developing, I think we're looking potentially at a second major lockdown. So I think it's going to be a moot point sooner rather than later. That is my fear. But for all the calumny and pillaring I've taken over the past couple of years for various work that I've done, which no one has really bothered to read to see what they're complaining about, I've never been once approached face to face by any of these people, because basically there's a level of cowardice. So I have a certain grudging respect for this person for making this big noise. But now I'm laughing up my sleeve at the idea that she's now upset that everybody knows it's her.
Yeah.
There's an amendment to the Constitution which I frequently invoke in situations like this, which is the Tough Shit Act of 1938. It's just one of those things. You know, you act and you take the consequences for your actions. They keep talking about consequences in this culture, but nobody seems to know where the star chamber is to get those consequences acted on. It seems very plastic.
Oh, it's called Twitter. Twitter is the star chamber.
I stay away from Twitter because it's on Twitter. I have been referred simultaneously on the same day as a demon in a human skin suit and by someone on the left, and a neutered butler of the social justice warrior movement by someone on the right. I can't fucking win, you know. I mean, they're all assholes.
Yeah.
Confusion to our enemies.
Yeah, everybody's brave on Twitter. It's, you know, the keyboard is the huge blunt instrument that you can beat anybody over the head with impunity.
Well, I mean, I recently did a favor for a friend, and he took endless shit from somebody in that particular venue for allowing me to do this favor for him. So, you know, irony has fled. It has been murdered in its sleep.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this and there's no such thing as a sense of humor anymore, because whatever you say is literally what you mean.
You know, I mean, a sense, but a sense of you're dealing with a culture that is terrified of laughter because it would demonstrate a loss of control, and you're also dealing with a culture that feels entitled to both, you know, explain, over-explain, and overanalyze an idea, and impose a personal critical judgment on it. I mean, anecdotally, you know, some 25 years ago, I did a comic book while I was working in television, which was a foolish thing to do. And in the course of this book, I had a character who was supposed to be reprehensible, clearly supposed to be reprehensible, tell an utterly reprehensible joke. And some fatuous asshole reviewed the book as if I had told the joke, as opposed to putting the words in the mouth of the character in order to convey the character. And I can't say whether that person honestly believed that was the case, or saw an opportunity to drive a knife into someone. But in either case, it demonstrates a level of credulity and fatuity that is staggering, certainly for someone who takes upon himself to criticize. Someone pointed out that it's easier to critique. It's easier to critique than create. I'm really good at both. You know, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I have a strong belief in, you know, an informed opinion. And one of the things I said in the Substack piece is that I'd never read the book that caused this person so much discomfort. So I couldn't say one way or the other whether it was truly as horrible as she said it was. I couldn't say. I don't really care. My concern was less with that or her, but rather with the promoter of the convention who bent to the will of someone to uninvite someone who's actually so important as this person is. That could blow back on someone like me who doesn't have that kind of footprint. I'm selfish enough to be concerned about that.
It blows back on just about everybody at any time, depending on who's making the decision. And I kind of joked about it because I looked at the guest list, and I've seen how this thing plays out before multiple times. You've seen, first of all, people who claim to be fans make a complaint. We wait. Then small-time creators say, hey, this is really not cool. And then we wait. And then the big-time creators say, I won't work for this company until this is rectified. And then it's a big stink. So we saw the first two strikes happen with Thought Bubble, because we saw the small-time creators saying, hey, I can't go if you're not going to take care of this. And I looked down the list and like, oh, there's Scott Snyder. Oh, there's Gail Simone. They've got 24 hours before Gail Simone's going to tell Scott Snyder he has to leave and do it publicly.
What? What's that about? What's this?
That's the Thought Bubble one. The Thought Bubble convention.
What about Gail and Scott Snyder? What's going on with that?
Oh, they're both on the same.
He's predicting.
I was predicting.
Oh, you're predicting one or both of them is going to 86 exit the show as well?
Well, we had seen it happen with other things in the past, like with Dynamite covers and such like that, with hiring Jay Lee. And since Scott Snyder had signed some sort of pledge online about, you know, I'm an ally of this or that, My joke was that Gail Simone was going to tell him he had to leave the convention publicly.
Right. Well, I mean, is Gail a guest at this show as well?
Yes, she is.
Oh, great. One more reason not to go.
I used to really like. Well, I still really like the stuff she wrote that I enjoy. I haven't been able to enjoy much of the later writing because it's gotten ham-fisted.
Well, she hates me so much. I really can't say. It's okay.
She hates Mike Barron too. We had him on the show last week, so it's one of these things.
Mike can be pretty hateful, but then again, so can I.
I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to judge people by the enemies they keep. Do they have a good quality of enemy? I like them. Okay.
I mean, I'm a great believer in the idea that just because you think the enemy of my enemy is my friend, you don't. No, it ain't work. Doesn't work that way. I hate everybody. My default is one of functional indifference until you prove otherwise, and that's where it's at.
All right. Well, those were the two stories that I had from comics this week. Mike, have you run into anything in your purchase? Because now Mike had two stores during the pandemic and ended up closing them, even though Arkansas did not give you a closure requirement, or
Nope.
you were allowed to stay open, no masks, no anything, but Diamond shut down and put you out of business.
Yes, I had to go mail order, and then I just said, well, let me just go all the way mail order, because all of a sudden all my help thinks, hey, comic book industry's collapsing, we better go find another job. I'd taken on all these writing contracts to do 6 books in the next year, and all of a sudden I had 2 stores with no help, and you only do so much, and so I just pared it down to where I could do everything myself, and I've still got a couple of people working for me part-time, but it was nothing I could try to keep 5,500 square feet of retail space open, and all the expenses, the overhead. I would have just been hemorrhaging money the whole year, because Marvel and DC majorly cut back on the product lines, and the customers that I still have, they're mail ordering them. They're always like, hey, why am I not getting this book? What's on hiatus? Why haven't I gotten a vendors moving on hiatus for 3 months? I mean, all these different books they're cutting back on. They're just not making enough product. When people are at home, they want something to read. And Marvel's DC's like, nah, we're going to take it easy. All our creators, they're at home. They're available to work. They're not doing conventions. No, we're going to cut back the production line. I mean, independents were like, hey, let's get after it. Guess what? Independents had a boomer year. The Scholastic and all the kids stuff. Manga, they got after it and realized, hey, people want something to read. Let's make something for them. I wrote an article that was published on ICTV2. It's like, this is an opportunity coming up. People are going to want something to read. Whatever you do, don't cut back. And sure enough, later in the day is when Chippy made the announcement, we're closing it all down. And I was like, wow, what timing.
Yeah, manga kills me that that they can have one issue of a book sell 83 million copies, and which is like, it makes Batman look like a speck of dust in the cosmic universe here, because I like 83 million copies of an issue of a floppy, and I did a check and I was like, there's 120 million people in Japan, which means that 3/4 of the country almost somebody has that book, which means that you're gonna have CEOs of companies with a comic book in their office somewhere that they're reading. We don't have that kind of spread here in the United States, and we've done it to ourselves, I think.
We're not a generalized reading culture, and to a certain extent, comics and comic style material fill the function of traveling fiction that we have. I mean, when I was a kid, there was a slew of paperback originals which were designed almost exclusively for an hour and a half to a 3-hour bus ride between cities. And comics and albums of that sort serve that function in that culture. The material Americans are not primed to read comics because comics are perceived as a children's medium. The assumption is that if you're doing comics, you're aimed at kids. If I meet a civilian at a party, they find out what I do for a living, their first assumption is Charles Schultz, and the second one is Batman, and I'm just I trying to explain what I do for a living, and that I have a niche market for my work is next to impossible to convey to a civilian. It really is. When I met my wife and I showed her my work, she didn't know what to make of it. I mean, people buy this, and as I told her, Jay, I live in a small town in Southern California, and I before the lockdown I had breakfast with colleagues every day. And comically enough, at every office, why the fuck are they paying you money for this? This is ridiculous junk. Why don't you get a real job? And they were only being semi-facetious. So we don't have that kind of culture. It's a different market. Also, we're not a particularly literate culture. There's a significant reason for the rise of podcasts. In that they're one step removed from the kind of true crime fiction and true reading that anybody's doing in the first place. More and more people are reading, or listening instead of reading, and they weren't reading all that much in the first place. I mean, I right now I'm reading a novel at home, and I listen to a book when I walk, and I'm they through the lockdown, because I'm not getting to the gym. Whereas I would read a couple of books a week when I was sitting on the bike reading. Now, of course, I'm walking, so I'm listening more and reading than I am reading in hard copy. So, the sales of that material doesn't really have any impact on what we do. It's an entirely different marketplace and an entirely different culture.
Yeah,
it really is.
Well, they just quit making anything except superheroes in America. Marvel, DC, superheroes, nothing but superheroes. In Japan, the manga, I mean, it is diverse in what they offer the readers. And American comics used to be diverse, but as the decades went by, they just knuckled down to one little bitty tiny niche market, and that's the only customer we're going to focus on. And then they wonder why they don't appeal to more people. It's pretty obvious.
I mean, what you're talking about is a result of the Comics Code Authority. The Comics Code Authority infantilized the product and infantilized the audience at the same time. It drove away anyone who was interested in material that was more challenging than superhero comic books. There was a potential available from what EC was doing. I mean, EC was destroyed primarily by the EC imitators, who took what EC did and made it more vulgar and more horrific. But the market, those readers just fled. And interesting enough, when those readers became of maturity, those guys made up the underground in those early 60s to mid 70s stuff. But they never really. There were very few people who identified the other genres besides humor and science fiction. You had Richard Corbin, you had Jack Jackson, who was somewhat inspired by what Kurtzman was doing. But for the most part, it was all mad-derived undergrounds. Every one of those guys pointed to Kurtzman as their godhead. And to a great extent, my career, since I identified my point of view and what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I was in my early 30s, was to try to find a way to catch whatever audience that might be out there that was the spiritual children of the people who were driven away in 1955 in the first place. And I've come to realize, to my despair, that audience doesn't really exist. And most American comic book fans are perfectly happy with the same super junk they've been reading since they were 13, with the slather of gravitas to make them feel more like they're reading an adult product. And what I find fascinating is that every couple of years, somebody comes along who made their bones working in mainstream super junk and then stepping away from it and doing genre material. You had Ed Brubaker, after years of doing the same junk at Marvel, then becomes a crime guy. A lot of the books that Scott Snyder has now announced that he's doing with Comixology reflect other genre material. And it's because they spent their time building a constituency for themselves in mainstream junk, and now they're taking advantage of that, going to the genre material. Me, I never did the mainstream junk except for an occasional paycheck. Unlike most of my colleagues, I didn't invest time and energy and money in attaching myself to a commercial character for a year, 2 years, 3 years to create a franchise. I wasn't good enough, and I really wasn't interested enough. Rather, I set out to build a franchise of material that reflected other genres, war material, crime, westerns, some science fiction when I was younger, but I've outgrown that stuff as well. And a lot of erotica, because I felt that there was a marketplace for that. In comics, the great subtext of superhero comics is the erotic component of superhero material.
Yeah, it's all the skin-tight costumes.
Well, all that stuff about desexualizing superheroines really obviates the fact that many gay men's first experience with masturbation is from superheroes' asses.
I found it funny and ironic that when Jerry Conway was on Twitter 2 months ago talking about how we're making the boobs on these anime heroines too large. This is ridiculous. We need to stop this. It's dangerous. I'm like, aren't you the same guy who was working with Wally Wood to make Power Girl's breasts larger every issue until somebody finally noticed?
Is that true?
Yeah, well, Jerry Conway created Power Girl.
I seriously doubt Jerry had anything to do with Woody drawing Power Girl's breasts. I truly do.
Well, they were working together when they introduced her, and that's the story, was that, there's she had that boob window kind of thing in her costume. They're like, let's just make them a little bit bigger every issue until we see if anybody notices. And eventually Jeanette Kahn was the one who noticed, and she's like, okay, I noticed, cut it out.
Okay.
And they went back to a normal size.
I was unaware of it because I frankly didn't read them. I couldn't have cared less.
Well, what comics
interests me enough to care about them.
What comics did get you into wanting to be a comic creator?
I've told this story more than once. When I was 4 years old, I had two cousins. One who was 7 or 8 years my senior. One was closer to 15 years older. Give me a refrigerator box filled with comics, which their parents obviously decided they want to get rid of. And I was 4. It was 1955, the summer of 1955. I climbed into the box and I had an epiphany, which is to say, I realized that these didn't just exist, that someone made them, and that I loved them so much that I wanted to be one of those people who made them. And to this day, I can still bring up the sense memory of the smell of that paper. And it's all I've ever wanted to do. I taught myself to read from comics, so that from that summer of 55, by the time I entered first grade, I was reading on a 4th grade level. Yeah. My parents, morons that they were, thought it was some sort of genetic anomaly. They never understood that it was comics that taught me to read. I couldn't pronounce the words, but by dint of their associations with the images, I was able to parse out the context and meaning. And so as I said, I've always been a reader, and I read deeply and well. And from that, I continue to read beyond comics, but I've always read comics. I was an enormous. I started reading the Superman and Batman stuff, and then I discovered the Julie Schwartz edited the return of the old Golden Age heroes, that first Silver Age stuff.
Yeah. And
I was part of a partisan group. We were all, fans of Gil Kane, Joe Kubert, Alex Toth, and Carmen Infantino. We all universally despised Mike Sikowski, until, of course, we got old. Those of us who stayed around got old enough to recognize the great qualities that Sikowski brought to the material, which was with nothing to do with uneducated eyes being able to see them. And I was then turned on to the Marvel stuff, and I became a complete Marvel junkie. I loved the FF and Spider-Man and all this shit. But by the time I became a working professional, I learned a couple of things. A, I wasn't interested in that stuff anymore. It had no impact on my life. B, I didn't have a skill set to compete in that arena. I just didn't. The only guy of my generation who was equipped landing to do superhero comic books was Rich Buckler. Ryson didn't care about it. Kaluta wasn't interested. Weiss was sort of interested, but he had no real work ethic. And Buckler had a work ethic. He was very deeply committed, and he landed running. But I had no skill set. I sucked. All I had was that rage I mentioned earlier. So I basically spent the first 10 years of my career learning how to do what I do in public, embarrassing myself on a daily basis. And it wasn't until I was driven away from comics and spent 1.5 years, 2 years away doing other things for a living that I came back to comics with a fresh idea and a fresh approach with a genuine point of view. Much of that was informed by the fact that when I was 18 years old, my first job in comics, seriously, was working as an assistant to Gil Kane. Now, my work looks nothing like Gil's.
No.
When I do superhero stuff, it sort of looks like Gil's. But Gil's influence on me cannot be overstated. I worked for Gil, I worked for Woody, I worked for Neil, and I worked for Gray Morrow. And Joe Orlando was my rabbi at DC Comics, who basically taught me how to navigate DC because Carmine hated me because he hated Gil.
Guilt by association.
Yeah, absolutely, no question about it. I'm quite serious. I mean, these guys known each other since they were children. They were 13 and 14 years old, and they all hated each other. The animus was universal and international. But Gil, I spent that 10-year career, the 10 years of my career, I wanted to grow up to be Gil Kane, but I was afraid I was going to end up like Wallace Wood. And when I came back to comics with Flag, I cannot for the life of me tell you why first had faith in me in being able to do something of any value. But Flag demonstrated that I had that value. But despite any belief system out there, Flag never had a commercial footprint. I sold one copy of Flag to hundreds of copies of superhero books. The reason that Dark Knight and Watchmen are acknowledged and remembered, besides the fact they came from a major house, is that they bore a resemblance to the anticipatory and expected tropes that the audience can identify as comic books. Comic books had evolved from a medium to a genre. And one of the results of that is that you now have smart guys, mostly writers, doing smart work, or at least smart adjacent work, but only in the arena and venue of superhero comic books. So they use superhero comic books, pardon me, in the same way that say westerns were used to depict the social issues and social struggles of whatever decade those movies were made. We recently watched a picture called The Man from Colorado, which was made in '47, which is so clearly it's about a Civil War veterans. It is so clearly a metaphor for what was called shell shock and battle fatigue, what we now call PTSD, of returning GIs. It was just that was that. And that's what superhero comics have become, but the smarter work. Anybody with half a brain knew in 1985 that what Alan Moore was doing with Watchmen was creating a cautionary tale. And significantly, that should have destroyed superhero comics as a marketplace, because it demonstrated the utter worthlessness of the product. But rather than that, it became a textbook, a show how to do it manual for a slew of talent who took children's book junk, slathered it with gravitas, and made it acceptable to be read by 40, 50, and 60-year-old men, mostly men, until women started coming into the business. And, I couldn't care less about this work. I mean, I just don't care. It doesn't interest me. I will occasionally do superhero books because, frankly, it's a paycheck that I can't turn down because I got to eat. Yeah. But for the most part, I'm more interested in doing other genre material. And, I'll occasionally read a superhero comic book here and there when someone says, you want to try this, try that, I mean, for example, I tried to read The Boys comic book. I didn't care about it at all, but I really fucking love the show. It's a great series. It's terrific. I
always found it humorous in a certain sense that, like you said, Alan Moore wrote Watchmen, and it should have really taken down the entire genre of superheroes, and people built it up and loved it. And more than that, the one character that really was his hated character, Rorschach, was popular in America. It's like, yeah, that's the guy I identify with.
But you also have to deal with a culture that Norman Lear spends an enormous amount of his life congratulating himself for breaking barriers with All in the Family, without ever really acknowledging, to my mind at least, that an enormous part of that audience completely agreed with everything that Archie Bunker said. That they weren't laughing at Bunker for his idiot beliefs. They were rather embracing those beliefs because they shared them. And that's my feeling is that's superhero comic books are about liberal ends achieved by fascist means. That is the nature of the form. It's what it's about. To paraphrase what Jules Feiffer said, when justice, they're not talking about justice. They're talking about order. Superhero comic books were created by 13 and 14 and 15-year-old Jewish kids in New York City in the 1930s and 1940s who were living in a state of stark terror that their world was going to come crumbling apart. Their parents had fled Europe. Now Europe was coming for them. And to a great extent, the work that was being done by these guys was a reflection of that terror, a reflection of a seeking of assimilation, a reflection of that terror of the advent of Nazism, and that it was told through these violent adolescent power fantasies, dressed up with the bearded nature of superheroes hiding behind these masks that were all American, blonde, beautiful, and blue-eyed. Drawn by guys who many of whom changed their names, and were concealing their own identities behind those fake names as well. And that what you have then is a tiny generation born in 1939 to 40, who were fans. Then my generation, who were born between say 47 and 52, and my generation earnestly believed that we would outlive superhero comic books. Because superhero comic books, when we came in, were drawn by 40-year-old guys, our parents and shit. And none of us really could take and we loved it as kids, but we'd outgrown it by the time we became professionals. What we weren't aware of, we were not anticipating, was the arrival of new talent, Frank Miller, Bill Sienkiewicz, Dennis Cowan, and the Black Mafia out of Detroit, who were able to do comics and didn't have to be bent to the wheel that Stan Lee had built, but rather could bend comics to the wheel of their own. And we were completely blindsided by this, and to a great extent, none of us ever recovered from that.
Well, and it's doing it again. we're having another spate of talent come in, and this time, the way I interpret it, and I'm, everyone's got their own interpretation. Instead of coming through the gateways of Marvel and DC, and even the independent presses, the crowdfunded model that's upon us now, this Kickstarter, this Indiegogo, Kickstarter's been around for several years now, but it's really been like the last 4 years that suddenly everybody who thinks they can make a comic book starts off a Kickstarter. And Sturgeon's law being what it is, 90% of everything's crap. But we're seeing some people who really do have some chops that you'd never heard of before. They're just trying out their hand at doing the comic books. So we might have a whole new market, a whole new I don't know what they call it, paradigm or what, but there's going to be a new publishing system, and it's going to be this crowdfunding model.
I'll be dead before it's an issue, so it's okay.
You're not looking at doing any crowdfunding of omnibuses of your own?
No, I stay away from it on a personal level only because I'm too paranoid and obsessed with the idea that if I failed, I'll look like an even bigger asshole than I am now. I'm more interested in the idea of. I mean, look, I'll be 70 in a couple of months, 71 rather, in a couple of months. I'm very energetic. I'm vital, but I could wink out in a fucking heartbeat. You know what I'm saying?
You keep yourself in great shape. I mean, you talked about walking. You're on the bike.
I look like an unmade bed. Trust me on this. And but I'm continuing to work because it's what I do. I love it. I don't work for a living. I work to maintain my attachment to reality. I have a pension. I have Social Security. I'm not hungry to make a living. It's okay with this. But the reality is, comics has become an IP farm for the most part, and I've been luckless in profiting from that because I suspect because I haven't really produced material that fits into the niche that is identified as having value. It's it's Die Hard in an office building. Well, it's with superpowers. It's in space. I'm not that guy. I've come to terms with that. And also I'm good, but not very nice. I'm kind of. No.
You don't have to be nice if you're good.
I'm conditionally kind.
Yeah.
I'm good to animals and I'm good to children, but I suspect all adults. And and I don't encourage people to I don't really feel the need to play to a base. I have no particular interest in politicking my way into popularity. I'm a great believer in being popular because I'm good as opposed to being good because I'm popular. And frankly, the standards of most of institutional fandom have nothing to do with mine. I see the things that are lauded and deeply appreciated by institutional fandom, and I don't scratch my head because I know exactly where they're coming from. But for the most part, their taste is in their mouth.
See, I would think that something like American Flag would be ripe for an adaptation by Netflix as a series. But
same here, but it hasn't happened, and I feel sort of luckless in that regard. And I'm okay with that. It's been optioned, but if it had capes and a mask, they could identify. Look, comics are perceived as a genre, not as a medium. I know they're a medium, but they are perceived as a genre. Riverdale is perceived in the same franchise context as Gotham.
Yes.
Okay. That's absurd, but it's a truth, and you can't argue with reality. It just gets in the way. So my feeling is I have nothing to prove and nothing to fight for. I'm perfectly comfortable. I live a really good life. I'm very lucky. I live in the southern coast, like the west coast of California. I live near the beach. I get up in the morning. I have a beautiful life. And other than that, I've had 50 years of doing this for a living. I still love doing it. I don't read comic books, but I like making them. I truly do. I love the physical effort required to make the material. I truly do. I spent a good half of the day making them, doing rough pencils on stuff, I finished some other stuff yesterday, and tonight I'll blow it off, and tomorrow morning I'll do the same thing. One of the results of being locked down for 18 months is that I sort of spread my time out. I no longer work by deadline. I work by mission, and I completed my mission today, and ultimately I completed my mission in time to do your show.
Thank you.
And and that was cool. Tomorrow I'll do the same thing. And Monday I'll swing back in. My assistant will show up, and we'll start working out the game plan for the week. Next week's a short one because I'm going to my first convention in 2 years. A week from yesterday, I'm going to Seattle on Friday next. It'll be a toe dipping experience to see how it plays. I'm kind of hinky about it, but got to get out there. So see what develops.
So where are people gonna go? Go ahead, Michael. You haven't had really a chance to ask questions here.
No, I didn't say anything. I was listening.
I thought it was you. So what are people going to see with your name on it here in the near future? I mean, where are they going to find your newest stuff or reprint stuff if you're putting together omnibus?
Well, the issue 4 of the second arc of Hey Kids Comics, subtitled Profits and Loss, will be out next week. And in January, the end of January, the trade paperback edition of Hey Kids Volume 2 will be out. At the end of February, the omnibus Times Squared the collection will be out, which will be the original first 2 graphic novels, the Flag Special, and the new book, Hallowed Ground Zero, plus an absolute buttload of back material, much of which has never been seen. And as I say, I'm working on a sequel to a book I did for Dark Horse called Marked Man, for a great new website called Neotext, which is devoted to the pulps, crime stuff, crime films, westerns, just the general slew of genre material that I've grown up loving. And I'm also working on a project with a colleague of mine who I love working with, that I can't talk about because we haven't announced it yet. But it's a really solid mainstream approach to material that I'm having a great time with. That's what I was working on today. And I'm working on the script for the sequel to Divided States of Hysteria, which is subtitled Hostile Makeover. Whether it ever sees print, I couldn't say. I don't know. That cancellation thing, which of course doesn't exist according to so many people, has its claws in various places. We'll see what develops. So I'm busy. Oh, and on top of everything else, I've got a quasi-Western that's been finished for 2 years, which I'm hoping to get out there in print sooner rather than later, called Sunshine Patriots. There are people who are watching this who've read some of that material. They know what it's all about. It's about 2 veterans of Roosevelt's Rough Riders who end up becoming the hired guns and protection of a brand new Hollywood studio in Los Angeles in 1911. So as always, I'm grabbing that commercial gold. Yes, indeed.
Yes. Oh, yeah. You need more commercial stuff out there, Howard, because
no.
I'll tell you.
No. I mean, there are enough guys out there who are selling their soul for superheroes with shit coming out of their eyes.
Oh,
I got no time for that.
No, but I was on. We stream every night, and I had a stream earlier this week. And off stream, I was telling the guest, it was a young guy, young crowdfunder. I was like, "Oh, you got to tune in Saturday night. We're gonna have Howard Chaykin." He's like, "Who's Howard Chaykin?" I'm like, "American Flag." He's like, "What's American Flag?" So I'm like going through Google trying to find. Okay, I'll just find this image of Batman that he drew where Robin was shining his boots and Catwoman was serving him drinks. I was like, because this is the kind of stuff that you were talking about, that eroticism aspect of comics. I'm like,
no, I was actually talking about Black Kiss, which is utter filth.
Well, yeah, there is that. Boy, I should have gave him that one. He'd love that. I'm being told that I didn't type the right URL into the chat, too. When you talk about Neotext, I tried to give that to people. I put in Neotext.
Neotext.
Thank you.
Neotext.
Perfect. I'll give that to him. Thank you, Giant Size Geek. I appreciate the notice that was the wrong URL. Perfect. So we're going to keep looking for those. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to get in and ask here?
Oh, well, I just loved Howard's American Flag. Like I say, really blew open the doors for independent comics. He was right at the forefront, and really want to congratulate him on doing that. Of course, he's always been at the forefront on the changing of the industry. I remember when his Blackhawk kind of shocked people when it was one of the first direct sale comics and had a guy stuffed into a water bottle. That was when we were first getting away from the comics code. Of course, we've been away for about 20 years now, but yeah, it's just if You want an interesting pitch to the new generation who doesn't understand what American flag is. Okay, he's got a bionic cat, or he's got a super intelligent cat with bionic hands, and he's got a sidekick named Flag.
Nicely made.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, and for some reason, I always, and again, this is because I discovered all these other comic books outside of DC and Marvel at the same time. The Pacific.
You were 13, you say?
Yeah, the Star Slayers and all that. But I always associate American Flag and Judge Dredd together because they.
Well, I was dismissed as doing a knockoff of Judge Dredd by a number of people who have it in for me, and okay. It's actually a knockoff of something else entirely, but that's another story for another day.
I never thought they were a copy of each other. I just thought they complemented each other so well.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's just because of the costuming, because of the
The
shoulder pads and the stuff. Yeah. I think a piece of Dredd and Flag facing off against each other would be just a wonderful piece of art. But
they certainly don't look alike because you never see Judge Dredd's face.
No, you don't. Well, until Sylvester Stallone takes his hat off, then
Right.
Real quick here, you did talk about some other media footprints that the people in comic books have gotten. You were able to escape comics and actually do some television. I believe you did some episodes of the original The Flash, didn't you?
Oh, I worked for 13 years as a television staffer. I worked my way up from The Flash to work on the worst, and then I went to work on some of the worst television show ever made. I was a story editor on The Flash, and I was a showrunner on Mutant X for the first couple of years of its existence.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. It's how I can afford the life I have now, because I left New York the day before I turned 35 because I knew that I was never going to be a serious earner in comics, and that there was a potential that I was going to get this old, and I had to put myself in a position of having more than Social Security and cat food casseroles to live on. And I stumbled into television and stayed there, and I'm very grateful. I got shit canned for my last job on June the 6th, 2002, and although it felt bad at the time, it was a very good thing to happen because it meant I was done, and I no longer had to deal with people that I was literally imagining dying in fiery car wrecks anymore.
Is there a difference? I'm hearing that's what I'm hearing. Is there a difference in the environments, the work environments between the comics industry and the television industry as far as the writing goes?
Comics is you work at home, you work alone, it's quiet. Television, you're working in a room full of other people, and the stress level is enormous. I mean, when I said I shouldn't have done that Power and Glory book in 1984 when I was working in TV, I was working 75 hours a week on a television series. I was the number 2 on a show. And I was writing and drawing a comic book. So literally for the space of 5 months, I was living on no more than 4 hours sleep every day. I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and draw until 7, and then go to my office, work until 8, come home and crash, and then just literally, it was just a cycle of endlessness. And I learned a lesson that I was no longer 25. But I loved working in TV until it stopped being fun. The first half of my career was working for some of the people that I genuinely continue to love and adore. The second half was working for people that I would literally wish ass cancer on. So there was a definite bifurcation.
Now, do you have anything in the way of a screenplay for bigger than TV? The full length movie kind of thing.
When I lost my TV job, I left Los Angeles. I moved. I live in what was my weekend house. And when I lost my job, it happened in June, as I said. The way television works is jobs become available in May and June. By the time I got fired, there were no jobs to get. There was no possible way of getting hired again until November. And by the 4th of July of that year, I decided that I was no longer interested in dealing with these fucking people. So I put myself out of it. I flew to New York on my own nickel and made myself available to DC Comics. And I had to convince them that I was finished with television because in those days, at least, I don't know what it's like now. In those days, television was where all comic book writers wanted to be. And I had finished my mission. I was done. And I had no desire whatsoever to go back to work. And I made that commitment. And by the end of that year, I moved full time up to this house. My wife was still commuting, but I never went back to the Valley, and I sold that house about a year later, and I'm done. So, this is me living the comic book artist lifestyle. And again, my wife pointed out to me that, the difference between that we were discussing from colleagues of mine who were hurting financially. And she pointed out that I had TV money. And I said, yeah, but that didn't happen to me. It happened because I made the conscious decision to get out there and find it. That as I say, that I realized at 35 that I had no options and no prospects and nothing going on, and I better save my own fucking life.
Yeah, there's a lot of writers who still want
that's what television did for me. Television saved my life.
and it's still a thing. It's more Netflix oriented now than it is, I guess, Netflix.
My understanding is the money is much flatter. That unless you've got a housekeeping deal, the money is much less.
Really?
I think there's a lot of ego attached to it, but I mean, the point is, I don't watch much comic book related material anyway. So I mean, I watched the first couple of episodes of Daredevil on Netflix. I was really bored out of my mind. I thought it was a bunch of cornball shit. I really did. I mean, my favorite comic book show on television was Banshee, which of course was never really a comic book, which sure felt like one, and Reprisal, which never found any footprint after the first season. Reprisal was a series that felt like it took place in the suburbs of City of Fire. And I mean, I watch an enormous amount of television, but not much superheroes. I mean, no superhero stuff. And I watch crime stuff. Last night, for example, I watched. What did I watch last night? I watched an old Western. No, I watched Merrill's Marauders, a late Sam Fuller war movie. And then I watched the second episode of Ted Lasso. One of the things that take away from Merrill's Marauders, the Sam Fuller picture, is that Jeff Chandler really looks like he was built by Jerry and Sylvia Anderson for Supercar and Fireball XL5. He doesn't look like a real person.
I love Fireball XL5.
Me too. I can still sing the theme song. It was a big part of our studio back in the 80s and the early 90s.
Part of your studio.
Be a fireball, bum 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 bum, a fireball.
Yep, I had that.
One of our assistants was obsessed with Fireball XL5 to an unhealthy degree.
I like Fireball XL5, Thunderbolts. It was.
Have you ever seen the parody of it with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore?
No.
Oh, Google this. Google Super Thunder Sting Car. Super Thunder Sting Car. Trust me.
Never heard of that.
I'm going to look that up.
1964. It's a kinescope. It will
fuck
like
the puppets with the puppet hands.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Professor Beaker. I love that stuff.
Oh man, yeah, because it did mess with me, that whole marionettes thing. I'm like, that looks interesting and terrifying at the same time.
Well, you've got to see this piece of film. It'll knock you out.
I'll check it out. All right, we're going to wrap things up because I know your time is valuable, sir. You need to get back.
Old people have to eat. Come on.
Yes, absolutely, and we're not paying you, so I hope you knew that in advance.
I did. But I'm willing to mistake attention for affection. So it works out nicely.
Absolutely, we would obviously love to have you back on anytime in the future.
Stay in touch. This has been a gas. I mean, it really has been a treat.
We are. Hang on after the show. I do have a question to ask you. I'll ask you there, and we can
privately.
Yes, privately.
I'll stick around. I
will
not.
It's about an upcoming show. So
okay.
Other than that, Michael, thanks for popping in tonight with us. Best of luck with that Robert E. Howard.
Michael, thanks so much, and get that email from RJ, please.
I'll do it immediately after this.
Thanks, man.
Folks in the chat, we appreciate you so much being here. We don't have a show without you, and as always, we just hope you have.